Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling maybe the biggest question of all. What happens when we die? And we're going to explore it by looking at these incredible detailed maps that different religions have charted for what comes next.
I mean, for millennia, right? We've all wondered, is that it? Is this the end? Or just the start of something else? It's a mystery that has pushed cultures all over the world to create these really profound spiritual maps for what lies beyond our final breath.
So, today we're going to compare two really different approaches. One sees the afterlife as a single, final journey. Think of it like a straight line. The other? It's more of an endless circle of return. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so first up, let's look at what we're calling the linear path. This is the one you'll find in the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They basically see life as a one-way street, a single journey that leads to one final, eternal destination. So the core belief here is pretty straightforward. You get one mortal life on Earth, and after that, there's a final divine judgment. Everything you did, your faith, your deeds, it all gets weighed. And based on that, you're sent to an eternal destination. It's a framework that really hinges on accountability for that one life you're given.
Okay, so take a look at this. What's so interesting here is that even though they all share that basic linear idea, the specifics can be really different. I mean, the idea of heaven is often this beautiful paradise like Gan Eden or Jannah. But where it gets really fascinating is the concept of hell and the in-between states.
Yeah, take Gehenna in Judaism, for example. It's not really the eternal damnation you might be thinking of. A better way to picture it is kind of like a spiritual laundromat. It's a place for purification, where the soul spends up to 12 months getting cleansed before moving on to the world to come. It's not typically forever. All right, so let's shift gears completely. We're moving away from that straight line and looking at a totally different map, one that's a circle. This is the endless cycle of rebirth you find in the Dharmic traditions of the East. The key idea here is something called samsara. It's basically this ceaseless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. You can almost picture it like we're all on this cosmic Ferris wheel. And what keeps the wheel turning? Karma. The sum of all your actions, good and bad, and their consequences, which directly shapes your next life. And here's the really crucial part. The ultimate goal isn't just to get a better life, a nicer seat on the Ferris wheel for your next go-around. No. The real goal in both Hinduism and Buddhism is to get off the ride completely, to achieve liberation, what's called moksha or nirvana, and break free from that endless cycle for good. So how do you do that? Well, Buddhism lays out a really practical guide for this escape. It's called the Eightfold Path. You can think of it as a step-by-step manual for life, things like practicing kindness, mindfulness, and just having proper conduct. The whole point is to extinguish the very desires that keep that wheel of samsara spinning in the first place. Okay, but what about the in-between? That space between death and whatever comes next. It's pretty fascinating because it turns out both the linear and the cyclical paths have these really detailed ideas about an intermediate state. In Tibetan Buddhism, they call this the bardo. It's this liminal space, a transitional state between death and your next rebirth. Your consciousness isn't tied to a body anymore, and it can experience these wild, intense visions. It's a moment of incredible opportunity. You could achieve liberation right then and there, but it's also filled with karmic peril. Now, over in the linear path, Islam has a concept called barzakh. It's this intermediate realm, a kind of barrier where the soul hangs out after death until the day of resurrection. It's very much a state of waiting, where you might even get a little preview, a foretaste of your final judgment. And this comparison just lays it all out so clearly, doesn't it? The bardo is an active journey on the way to your next life in the cycle. Barzakh, on the other hand, is basically a waiting room for your one final unchangeable judgment. One is a pathway, the other is a lobby. So let's talk about the endgame. What are these final destinations actually like? As you might guess, the visions of what you're ultimately heading towards are just as different as the paths to get there. If we look at the Quran's description of Jannah, or paradise, it's just filled with these beautiful sensory details. Flowing springs, every kind of fruit. It's described as a literal garden of peace, a physical and spiritual reward for a life well lived. And you see something similar in Jewish tradition with Gan Eden. I mean, the name itself says it all, right? It's a return to the Garden of Eden. It's this idea of getting back to that blissful, perfect state where the soul can just exist with God. But now, let's contrast this idea of heaven as a place, with the ultimate goal of the cyclical path, nirvana. Because nirvana is not a place you go to, it's a state of being you achieve. The word itself means something like to extinguish or to blow out, like a candle flame. You're extinguishing the flame of desire, of suffering, of the self. It's not a destination, it's the end of the journey itself. It's ultimate peace.
Okay, so we've looked at these two completely different maps, these two philosophies for the afterlife. What does it all mean when you put it together?
Well, we've really seen two big ideas. The linear path emphasizes justice and accountability, the eternal importance of this one life. The cyclical path, on the other hand, emphasizes liberation and personal spiritual effort, the long process of breaking free from suffering over many lifetimes.
But despite how different they are, they're both getting at something deeply human, aren't they? They both speak to this need for meaning, for justice, for the hope that our actions, that our lives, actually matter in the grand scheme of things. Which kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. Are these different maps of the afterlife really telling us about the next world, or are they telling us more about how we should live in this one? Maybe their real value isn't about the destination at all, but about how they guide the journey we're on right now.